years 9 and 10. I hope you're well. It's Miss Weir here, and I'm going to be taking you through both your English lessons this week. Now, we're going to try and get a poem done each lesson, so let's get cracking. Today, we're going to be looking at Percy Shelley's Ozymandias, which is probably one of my favourite poems. And our word of the week is hubristic. That's the adjective form of the word, meaning having confidence and arrogance that leads to your downfall. So it comes from the ancient Greek root hybris, which means you're so overconfident you almost reject the gods. So it's the idea that you're so overconfident that something bad is almost destined to happen to you because of how overconfident you are. So we've looked at this word already if you're in year 10 with Mr. Burling. But it's the idea that you're so overconfident, you have so much arrogance that it leads to a downfall. Okay, so I'd like you to have a go at this question for me, please. Why would being hubristic be bad for a person? So if you could pause the video now and have a go at... Okay, hopefully you had something similar to what I'm about to show you. So if you get your purple pen out, ready to edit your answer. So, being hubristic is bad or negative because it refers to excessive arrogance that results in someone's downfall, like the story of Icarus. So that's a Greek myth which illustrates this idea about a man who made wings out of wax, and he was so overconfident, he flew next to the sun and they melted and he died. Okay, so that's a nice example of hubris, that idea you're so confident it's going to lead to your downfall. Okay, so let's get straight stuck into our poem then. So remember, you need to pause the video whenever you would like to write anything down. Just make sure you start jotting down some notes. So how does Shelley present the theme of power in Ozymandias? So this was written in 1818 by Percy Shelley. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, you mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away." Okay, so first, before we get really stuck in, we're going to go through the context of this, but let's talk through what's happened in this poem. So we've got Percy Shelley, who we could probably assume is the I here. I mean, it's a made-up story. He didn't actually meet a traveller. And then he says, I met a traveller from an antique land who said. So from the point of these speech marks to the end, it's the traveller that Percy Shelley has met who is speaking, okay? Until we get to my name is Ozymandias. And at that point, the statue, which has got these words printed on it, that's the voice of the statue coming through there. So we've got three different speakers in this poem. Now I'm just going to run through our three key concepts for today. If you'd like to get any notes or have a go about using these in sentences, feel free. I just want to get through them as quickly as possible. So first of all, we've got our key concept, futility. Now we've looked at this last week. It means that something is totally pointless to do. So this man pushing this big round stone up the hill is pointless. It's futile because it's going to roll back down again. Our next key term is a frame narrative. So a frame narrative is the use of a fictional narrator, so a character to tell a story. Maybe pause now if you can work out which is the fictional narrator in our current poem. So a fictional narrator to tell a story that tells it almost like a frame. So obviously you should have worked out that that's the traveller, isn't it? And a layered narrative is the use of multiple layered narrators. So can you work out how many narrators we had in our poem that we've just read? So you should have got three. So we've got the speaker, the poet, we've got the traveller, and we've got the statue. So that's a layered narrative, multiple layered narrators. So we've got three different narrators in our story. And our final key term, is sonnet. Remember, these are all nice subject terms we could use to get our AO2 marks. So a sonnet is a type of poem that's written in iambic pentameter. So we've come across that in Macbeth if you're in year 10. So iambic pentameter is where the rhythm of the line is written so it sounds like a heartbeat. So it goes da-dum, 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 da-dum. So a sonnet is a poem that's written like this with 14 lines and often ends in a rhyming couplet. So 2 words that rhyme together at the end. So let's use these key terms and have another look at our poem. So you have got your context paragraph in your books, but I'm not going to take us through that because I want to just get us straight into it. But if you want to read through that context paragraph and have a go answering the questions yourself, feel free. But in the meantime, I'd like you to get these 3 sort of key context points down for me and anything else I say that you think might be important. So Ozymandias is written by Percy Bysshe Shelley. He came from a very wealthy family. He was a romantic poet. You would have looked at those in year 7. And he was a bit of a revolutionary. So he was an atheist, which was a big no-no in 1818. And he was also in support of protests that happened when people were campaigning for rights. And he wrote against the government killing a lot of protesters at the Petersburg protest. But his poetry doesn't tend to be that political. Now, this sonnet, Ozymandias, was written in 1818 when Britain announced it was getting a statue of Ramesses II, who was a famous pharaoh from ancient Egypt, and they were shipping it back to the British Museum. So it was a bit of a symbol of the power of the British Empire, the fact that we were prestigious enough to have this, but also there was a growing interest in the ancient world and in ancient Egypt. So it was quite an exciting thing. It would have been in all the newspapers. So that's Ramesses II, who was an old ancient Egyptian pharaoh, so thousands of years before Shelley wrote this poem. Now, Shelley wrote this at a time when Britain was cracking down on civil freedoms. So there was a law that scrapped the habeas corpus law, and obviously there was that protest that I spoke about, and there'd been some revolutions in France that Britain was very anti, and Shelley himself tried to publish lots of things that people refused to publish because his ideas were so sort of out there. So this is a poem also about the power of tyranny and how the fact that tyranny, its power is ultimately futile, just like any man's power is ultimately futile. It might be worth also noting that this poem was written in competition. So Shelley and his mate did a little competition about who could write the best sonnet about this statue, about Ozymandias. Okay, so the Friends poem actually then goes on to talk about the downfall of London at the end. So we can see that Shelley is really engaging with these ideas of power and the end of man's power and how it's futile and it's definitely going to disintegrate. So let's get cracking with our zooming in. If you need to pause the video to get those notes down, please do. So first quote then: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." So right away we've got this use of a layered narrative. If you need to revise that, look back. So this is a structural climax, the point where the poem really gets exciting, and it really highlights the fact that this king is saying, "Look on my works, you mighty, in despair," when actually this statue has been found by the traveller lying in the sand. It really shows how artificial the power of man is. Okay, so let's make sure you write that annotation down for me. So how artificial his power is. Okay, he thinks that everyone's going to look on his great city, his great tomb, that's where the statue came from, for centuries to come after this pharaoh's died, and actually someone's just found it lying in the sand. So it really emphasizes how man's power is broken down, that use of layered narrative as well. So we're not hearing about it from the emperor, we're not hearing about his reign from his statue, we're hearing about it from Percy Shelley, who heard about it from a traveller, who heard about it from a statue. Okay, so it's really diluting that authority there through that layered narrative. We've also got this dramatic irony. Do you remember that's when the audience or the reader knows something that the speaker doesn't? So here, the statue is telling us, the king is telling us to look on his works, look on his artworks, look on his statue, and despair at how mighty and wonderful he is. And that's ironic because maybe we would despair because even this man with all this power is being forgotten. His power has been broken down by time and by nature. So it really emphasizes here the hubris of human power, that over arrogance and the futility of it. It's pointless to try and be more powerful than time or nature. That's what Shelley's telling us here. Now, if we do a quick zoom in on that word works, it's referring to his artwork here. So it's referring to all the things he's done in history. And again, perhaps Shelley could be saying that art actually survives longer than power. The statue is still here when the king is long dead. So it's the idea that art goes beyond power, just like Percy's poem here is gone beyond Percy himself, hasn't it? But even art is eroded by history. So again, it's the idea that history and nature come up trumps every time. Okay, let's look at this second quotation then. So round the decay of that colossal wreck. So the decay is, again, he's talking about the crumbling statue. So to decay means to break down slowly. Now that's really a big contrast to the confidence and the imperatives used. So we've got that imperative here, haven't we? The imperatives used by the statue. It's a big contrast, and it undermines his authority again. So showing again how this man's power, how this pharaoh, his power is futile in the face of nature and time. If we look at this noun phrase, it's again ironic, colossal wreck, because we've got that juxtaposition between a wreck, which is something that's been destroyed, like a shipwreck, and colossal comes from this word, Latin for column, meaning a great pillar that holds up a great big building, so something majestic and powerful. So we've got majestic power contrasted with destruction. So it's again showing how power is ultimately destroyed, and that's a really nice zoom in. And finally, we've got some alliteration here as well. Now, don't pick on alliteration unless you have something interesting to say. If you want to pause the video and just highlight that alliteration out, go for it. So you should have picked up on boundless and bare and lone and level. So that extended sound, that reflects the overwhelming power of the desert, the idea that the desert sands continue all around him for as overwhelmingly as those alliteration continues, and it again shows the futility of man's power. This statue will never survive in comparison to the desert, which will be eternal. So again, Shelley's showing us that nature is more powerful than man, the hubris and futility of man. And finally, I've got a nice little note here that the prelude might be a nice link poem for this to compare to. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to have a go at completing your own point on this poem. So here's our key question. What is Ozymandias saying about power and nature? To get to this page, you're going to have to flick through your books until you get to the next lesson on this poem, and it'll be towards the end of that lesson, okay? So what is Ozymandias saying about power and nature? These are all the key words we need to use. Remember, you've got your knowledge organizer in the back of your books as well. So have a go at that now. Okay, so hopefully you've had a crack at putting together that that paragraph point. Now, if you want to grab a purple pen and you can add to it. So Shelley uses his sonnet Ozymandias to demonstrate the hubris and artificial nature of human power, as well as the futility of man's attempts to assert power over nature. So that's a really nice point that should get you started on having a go at the rest of the paragraph if you can. All right, I will see you tomorrow, and well done on all your hard work.